I would like to hand over to Taeke. Taeke, first of all, let me introduce you. You are the founder and CEO of Level, a WordPress agency enterprise WordPress agency in Rotterdam, with a particular focus on web accessibility and e-commerce. Taeke, it's really lovely to have you join us today. Thank you so much. Feel free to go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you. I hope I'm sharing my screen right now. And I only have 10 minutes, so I'm just gonna dig in right away. What is web accessibility? If we had a bit more time today, I would ask you all this question and wait for some responses. But I did that before, and I know a lot of people would reply with something like, okay, let's making websites usable for people with a disability. Now, this answer is not wrong, but merely a fraction of what it really encompasses. An explanation I prefer is accessibility is the practice of making your website or products usable by as many people as possible. And we could add to that on as many devices as possible. Not everybody uses the web in the same way. Instead of focusing on people with a disability, we should talk about making the web as inclusive as possible for anyone. But what are we talking about? Who is this disabled audience? We typically speak of people who are blind, visually impaired, people who are deaf, hard of hearing, maybe people with a motor impairment, or people with a cognitive disability. Between 12 and 26% of the world population, or the Western world, has a disability, and this 12 to 26% is kind of depending on the definition you use and the source. Overall, 20% is an accepted average. Just in Europe, there are over 100 million persons with disabilities. But these statistics don't include people who would not consider themselves to be disabled, or people who are not comfortable disclosing their disability. So think of people with chronic pain, sleeping disorder, dyslexia, or color blindness. These groups are underrepresented in the previously mentioned numbers. Another group that is not included are the so-called temporary disabilities. A broken arm is a temporary motor impairment. Dilated pupils after an eye exam is a temporary vision impairment. A young baby at home and no more than 4 hours of sleep a night, that's a temporary cognitive impairment. Young parents will like that there's this term for that. When talking specifically about the disabled audience, 20% of the world population is an accepted average. But remember, that does not include many temporary and hidden disabilities. On top of that huge number, we have a global population that's aging. The global population, aged 60 years or over, was about 1 billion in 2017. And this number is expected to double again by 2050, when it's projected to reach nearly 2.1 billion. As we all grow older, we will face new challenges when it comes to using digital technologies like the internet. Our eyesight declines, making it harder to focus on a computer screen, mobile device. Our concentration wanes. We will find it harder to remember where we saw something. Our cognitive reasoning changes. We rely more on our own experiences rather than seeking new information because it's harder to recall and process it. And our motor skills may decline due to illnesses such as arthritis, making hand-eye coordination harder. Interestingly, the needs of your aging audience overlap with the accessibility needs of people with disabilities. Thus, websites, applications, and tools that are accessible to people with disabilities are more accessible to older users as well. But there's more. There's more people that may not fall in any of the aforementioned groups, but who would benefit from web accessibility anyway. Maybe that's you. Imagine, for example, being in a train and want to watch a video with subtitles, or a stressful situation and you need to complete a complex task online, like filling out a large form or ordering something. Or maybe it's this sunny spring or summer afternoon when you decide to go home early and finish some work in the garden or the park, and the sun is hitting your screen. So in conclusion, web accessibility should not be seen as something you do for a minority of people. In the end, we all benefit from web accessibility. On to the business case. Me just telling you that we all benefit from web accessibility might not convince you. But what if we try to build a case based on facts? Typically, a business case is about money. Things to consider are, does it increase our income? Does it save us money? Does it help us mitigate risk? That's exactly what we'll discuss today. Inaccessible websites lose sales, simple as that. And let me illustrate why that is and how you can increase your revenue. Let's start with some key figures. We already said 20% of the population has a disability. We know that 69% of web users with a disability simply leave a web shop when they notice it's not accessible. The disabled audience, for example, in the UK, has an estimated spending power of 24.8 billion pounds. In the US, that's around $490 billion on that group. Now, I run a web shop that's not necessarily optimized for accessibility. I'm selling shoes, sneakers, whatever. The average order value on this web shop is 100 euros. The average conversion rate for footwear is roughly 4%. Let's say my web shop has 100,000 visitors per month. So when 69 of the disabled audience immediately leaves, I just lost about 14,000 potential customers in 1 month. And knowing my average order value and the average conversion, we can also calculate that around 55,000 euros per month is not being spent in my web shop. That's more than 660,000 euros annually. The worst part of this, that money is not lost. The money these customers had to spend simply went to the competition who did pay attention to web accessibility. And on top of that, studies in the US show that friends and family of people with disabilities will also avoid inaccessible websites. Now keep in mind that 75% of online consumers with an impairment are not after the cheapest products. They are simply after the best user experience with the least amount of barriers. A second case. There are plenty of ways to reduce costs by implementing web accessibility. This is a project that I worked on with my company. It has a name that only the Dutch can pronounce, the Regionale Belastinggroep. It's a tax authority that collects taxes for municipalities and water boards. And with every tax assessment they sent, they received thousands of calls to their call center. And this was putting enormous pressure on the team answering all these calls and questions. In 2020, for the first time in years, the RBG experienced a spectacular 38% decrease in the number of phone calls they received on their call center, which turned out to be a huge saving, of course. How this was done? We simply created a new, fully accessible website where information is centered around top tasks. It simply got easier for people to find what they were after, and they didn't need the call center anymore. A third case is about risk, mitigating risk. For most countries around the world, there's some sort of regulation in place when it comes to web accessibility. So wherever you are in the world, please do some research on your local legislation on web accessibility. In 10 minutes, it's impossible to cover all countries and all types of laws that are around there. But the fact is that more and more countries have laws on web accessibility, and depending on where you operate, you could be facing hefty fines. So that's a financial risk. In Europe, we have the EU Web Accessibility Directive, which means that by September 21st, 2020, all public sector websites have to be accessible. Plenty of member states already have some form of accessibility legislation. But last year, the EU adopted the European Accessibility Act, which means that the EU member states have 2 years to translate that act into their national laws. And that will have quite some impact, as it will reach further than just European businesses. As you can see here, the European Accessibility Act also applies to any business product or service that is sold or in use within the Eurozone. So it's not just member state businesses. Another example where you could face a hefty fine is if you get sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, in the United States. The number of lawsuits under the ADA regarding website accessibility has been exploding over the past couple of years. Around 2,200 per year, that's around 6 per day. And the real problem is it lacks proper guidelines for website owners. On average, the cost of an ADA case is between $15,000 and $100,000, which does not include internal costs to actually fix the problem. Now, this is just money, but consider the harm that a case could do to your brand. There's examples of Walt Disney, for example, that had a website overloaded with video and audio content, which could not be turned off by physically impaired people. Disney was to make substantial changes to their website to accommodate individuals with disabilities, had to pay the plaintiffs a sum of $15,000, and they had to pay up $1.5 million in attorney fees and legal costs. Another really recent case is Harvard Business School. They failed to provide captioning for free course materials supplied online. Harvard had to pay up 1.5 million and additionally had to commit to making their content accessible from December 2019 onwards. Key takeaways: this is the time to invest in web accessibility. 20% of the world population is disabled and does not include people with a temporary disability. On top of that, we have a huge aging population with a lot of money on their hands that also benefits from accessibility improvements. And the fact is, the majority of websites and online applications at this moment are not accessible at all. There's a huge opportunity there. By investing in web accessibility now, you have the opportunity to increase market share by doing better than the competition. You have the opportunity to increase conversion by taking away barriers. You have the opportunity to bind a really loyal and new client base to your website. And you have the opportunity to save big time on your customer support or call center. Now, to end, keep in mind that you are not your user. Time for Q&A, I guess.
Brilliant, Taeke. Thank you so much. And in that space of a short 10 minutes, I'm already convinced of the business case. The fact that 20% of people are living with a disability right now, and that is, of course, a number that you can assign to potentially lost business, I think is absolutely is a very, very interesting headline stat, which is a really strong conversation starter to getting investment into accessibility. First of all, let me just remind everyone that you can put questions if you have them into the Zoom chat. And I can see there's one question come through actually from Paul. Paul, so Taeke, one of the questions we've got through is, are there actually guidelines in that European law that you referred to? Or does that law have the same problems as the ADA where there aren't specific guidelines?
No, we have guidelines, and the problem is that the ADA is about discrimination. So if you feel discriminated, you can basically sue. In Europe and that we here, it's simply the WCAG 2.1, level AA. That is the standard that you have to go for, basically. So that's pretty clear. That's a clear set of rules that you can follow.
Another question that I've got in here is, what plugins, if any, for accessibility would you recommend? Or is that too much of a blunt solution, or even a solution at all?
I wouldn't say that's a solution. That's really, putting a bit of bandage on an open wound that is, or an open heart where blood is spilling out or something. No, I would really say that start with the foundation. Make sure that a website is built and semantics are correct, and that there's a proper understanding of what is important in web accessibility. Unfortunately, I could not fit that in these 10 minutes, but I would say education has a key role here, and not just applying another plugin on top of many others. There is a really cool plugin or solution by 10up that is sort of using AI to see what's on a picture and using that for alt text. So the alternative description of an image that gets read out loud by, for example, a screen reader. That is cool, and that will certainly help. But any other plugins, I think, do more harm than good.
That's a really interesting plugin, and that's something I would love to learn a bit more about, because the idea of actually, because there's so much talk about, oh, let's use AI for something. AI is proposed as a solution without necessarily any real problems. So it's a bit like blockchain was a couple of years ago. So that's a really interesting, impactful change that could be quite valuable. When it comes to the kind of quality assurance or the user acceptance testing, the UAT process, is there a specific change that you might recommend to that, or you might think people should be aware of, for teams who want to get better at this, who want to get better at embedding accessibility into what they do?
Well, yeah, certainly for quality assurance, you need to educate your team. So if you have someone in the team that you know is testing for code quality and stuff, educate them so they can also test for web accessibility and really understanding where improvements can be made. And but in the end, um, if you don't go too fancy and you use proper HTML and basically all the basics, you can create awesome websites by just using the standards that are there already. It usually kind of goes wrong when we try to be try to go completely fancy on things, overruling standards. So it would really work if your quality assurance officer or a person in the team has good knowledge on accessibility, web accessibility, but it really goes for the whole team. So from product owner, project manager to designer, developer, I think it's a responsibility for all of us, really.
I think that's a really important point. The fact that it is a responsibility across the entire team and not simply
Yeah.
a group within the team, or maybe like an interest group that perhaps just comes in and does a bit of accessibility testing. That should be something that's fundamental to the entire process, from collecting user stories to you know the design and build, the design
Yeah.
and the build. Yeah.
That's what we do when we're onboarding with a client, and we already tell them, like, okay, beware, we're going to look at your brand guidelines, like the colors, typography, contrast, all these kind of things. And when delivering a project, we try to educate and teach their team to use the project in a proper way and to write accessible content, because we can create an accessible project, but the client could actually mess it up, so to say, by putting content or images or video in there that are not accessible. And then basically it's a waste of energy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, well, Taeke, I'm afraid we have run out of time. I can see a few more questions have come in, but I'm pretty sure we'll be staying around for the drinks afterwards.
I'll stick around for sure.
So what we'll do is make sure that if you do want to find Taeke in the breakout rooms, just reach out to us and we can find out where he's gone and put you in the same room.